With him about his latest releases and his career, so do stay tuned for that. But let's deal with this issue first. Earlier on the week, you may remember we had a representative from an Israeli delegation that was visiting South Africa. He came as a guest on the show. The civil society group called Boycott, Divestment and Sactions against Israel in South Africa had concerns about some of the leader of the delegation's utterances and wanted to set the record straight. So talking to us here on the program, we've got Muhammed Desai, and he is representing BDS. Good to have you, Muhammad. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity.
It's an absolute pleasure. I mean, I think it's only the right thing to do. A lot was said during the interview. So what was it that concerned you that the Israeli leader was saying?
I guess that there were three main issues. The first is this delegation that came from Israel is really part of a larger propaganda or PR initiative by the Israeli regime. It comes at a time when Israel itself has admitted to becoming increasingly isolated on the international stage. Israel has appointed a government minister, Gilad Erdan, has given him R500 million worth of funding and resources to initiate such contacts, to try to break the boycott that the government of Israel is currently facing. We know from our own history, it was B.J. Foster during his term as Prime Minister that initiated a program of dialogue and denter, and his basic aim was, whilst oppressing black South Africans locally, internationally, he was trying to give an image of a more human image of the apartheid government. Yeah. And so for us, in many ways, the Israeli delegation being in this country was part of that larger project, and we do welcome the South African Parliament rejecting the invite and rejecting the meeting with the Israeli delegation. The delegation, and on the show, tries to suggest that they still met with the South African Parliament or with parliamentarians. Actually false. I mean, the Israeli delegation took selfies outside Parliament, but any tourist can do this. This is by no stretch of the imagination a formal meeting with the Parliament of South Africa.
Which was raised during the interview because, to be honest, the only interaction that they had with any member of the ANC, as far as we were made to be aware of, was Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. The rest of the ANC had said no, they're not interested.
Well, the ANC, but also the South African Parliament. It was an official rejection by Parliament itself, not just by the ANC. The ANC, in addition, of course, rejected the visit. Yeah. And Mandla Mandela, for example, welcomed the initiative both by Parliament as well as by the ANC, saying that this is really in the footsteps of his grandfather, that Mandela would be proud of such a move because it's taking a pro-Palestinian posture when it comes to this issue. But another issue that the guest had raised was the fact that, we call it a fabrication, and that is that Israel has stopped building settlements.
Yeah, which is the question I want to ask you next.
This is an utter fabrication. Month-on-month comparison between 2017 and 2016 has shown that Israel has actually tripled in the amount of settlements that have been built in violation and complete disregard of international law. In addition, in this very period that we're speaking about, Israel has destroyed a school, for example, to make way for Israeli settlement construction, leaving 80 Palestinian children out without an education, sitting in tents because of this sort of action. Yeah. And we must put the context of settlements into the larger picture. And today is the 25th of August. 25th of August 1956 was the exact date that the South African government, for example, forced 100,000 people from their homes in Johannesburg, demanding that they leave their homes to make way for white-only areas. And this is really what the settlement project is about. It's about creating Jewish-only areas where the indigenous Palestinian people once lived.
Yeah, so distancing himself, which he did here during the interview, from the settlement, saying that they had stopped since December. You're disputing all of that. So,
absolutely.
So it wasn't true. The other thing that what he spoke about was that the delegation was saying that they were trying to engage in dialogue and not boycotts anymore. Does it ring for you? Would you like to see that happening as well?
Again, the father of dialogue in this country, the father of reconciliation in this country is Archbishop Desmond Tutu. In many ways is considered the father of reconciliation and dialogue. But even Tutu himself, even our own Archbishop, was at one period in our history the champion of the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign against apartheid South Africa. We must first end apartheid South Africa's abuse of the indigenous people before we can speak about reconciliation, was a kind of logic that was used in the 1980s. And likewise, it's the same logic that we apply regarding Israel and Palestine. End your human rights abuses and end your violations of international law, and then the process of dialogue and reconciliation will kick in. And so we're asking Israelis, we're asking the Israeli delegation, that if you really want to take a leaf out of the South African history, that is that the non-violent route of imposing sanctions, of imposing pressure on a regime can actually be successful in terms of bringing the parties on a fair basis to the dialogue table.
Just finally, as we wrap this up, I mean, we see this conflict that's been going on for decades, and it's something that, you know, many people would love to see solved, because I think that there is too much bloodshed, there is too much devastation caused by all of this. In your opinion, I know you gave some perspective now, but what ideally needs to be done?
Well, we're more hopeful than ever before. We think that the Palestinians the Palestinians are growing an increasingly successful international campaign in terms of putting pressure on Israel. But more importantly, and perhaps significantly, is that there's a growing amount of Israelis and Jewish South Africans, for example, and Jews across the world that are beginning to dissociate themselves from the Israeli regime. And this is proving to put Israel into a difficult spot. We know the kind of successful movement that was built through the End Conscription campaign and various other white comrades coming out and supporting our own struggle. And a similar move is currently taking place regarding Israel and Palestine. And we are hopeful that a solution similar to our own, where no matter where you came from, no matter how we got here, it's much easier to live together than to live apart.
All right, we'll leave it on that optimistic note. Muhammed Desai, thank you for talking to us, sharing your views, and also having a right to reply to a guest that appeared during the week. He was from an Israeli delegation that was visiting South Africa, and there were some comments that were made that the boycott, divestment and sanctions against Israel in South Africa were not happy with, so this was their right to reply to that. All right, Muhammed, thanks very, very much. All right, sports time. As Valen told us in the previous bulletins, there is so much happening this weekend, so I better give her all the time so she can talk us through what's about to take place. Morning to you again, Vane.